Andrei Chikatilo, serial killer, sadist, ripper, cannibal, and the most bloodthirsty maniac of the 20th century. He was nicknamed the Rostov Ripper, Mad Beast, Satan, Red Nightmare. For 14 years, he terrified the citizens of USSR. He could be caught earlier, but for some unknown reason, he was never given enough attention and released. Well, who could have thought that this inconspicuous man with a university degree, a teacher, a party member, could be the very maniac hunting down women and children? In this video, we will tell you a story about inhuman brutality and atrocities committed by the most infamous USSR maniac. Childhood. Andrei Chikatilo was born on 16th of October 1936 in the village of Yablushne, in a regular rural family. His father, Roman Chikatilo, went to fight in the Second World War in 1941, but soon after got captured by fascists as a POW. He was released by American allies and returned to the USSR. Back at home, Roman Chikatilo was proclaimed a public enemy and sentenced to hard labor. Little Andrei Chikatilo lived with his mother. He had a rough childhood, having witnessed the Second World War and post-war famine. Besides, he suffered an inborn neurological disease, hydrocephalus, and as a consequence, enuresis. Andrei regularly wet his bed until he was 12, for which he was systematically beaten by his mother. Despite all the hardships, in 1943 his mom gave birth to his sister, Tatiana. In 1945, after the end of the Second World War, Chikatilo went to school. Since the very first day, he was constantly bullied by his schoolmates. He was mocked for wearing glasses and regularly visiting the toilet because of his enuresis. Chikatilo tried to avoid drawing too much attention to himself in fear of getting bullied. He was very quiet and repressed. Another strain on his psyche was his mother. She told him stories about the 1932 to 1933 famine. Andrei, in awe, learned stories about his bigger brother, Stepan, who, allegedly, was attacked on the street and eaten. However, it was later determined that there was no Stepan in Chikatilo's family tree. The story was made up by his mother to make her son obey her and stay at home. The story definitely had an impact. During 1946's famine in USSR, Andrei refused to go out of fear of being eaten. Mental problems and psychosis followed. First education and mandatory army service. Despite all this, turning 17, Andrei Chikatilo successfully graduated from school and decided to become a lawyer. In 1954, he submitted his documents to Moscow State University, but didn't make it through the application. For himself, he made up another explanation. Being a son of a repressed father, he was censored out of the university. The only remaining path he saw was applying to the School of Communication in a small town, Okhtyrsky. In 1957, being 23 years old, Chikatilo was drafted into the army. At first, he served in a prestigious military unit as a Middle Asian border guard. Then, thanks to his education, he was sent as a comms officer to Berlin. According to some unverified sources, during his service he was sexually assaulted by his fellow officers, which left yet another scar on his psyche. Education and personal life. Following his demobilization, Chikatilo decided to make a fresh start and move to Rostov Oblast. At this new place, he applied to work at a telephone station. In his spare time, Andrei Chikatilo wrote various articles for local newspapers as an independent correspondent. Life was finally turning out good for him. In 1963, Chikatilo applied to Rostov State University. When he got his long-awaited degree, he decided to become a teacher. The decision wasn't random. Quirks and difficulties in his sexual life date back to school. According to his own memories, he experienced his first sexual satisfaction when he was in 10th grade. One day, his little sister's friend came to Chikatilo's house, but the mother and the sister were away for a while. Andrei experienced sexual arousal when he saw the girl's underpants under her skirt. He knocked her to the ground and laid on top of her, which invoked immense sexual pleasure in him. The girl did not understand what happened, and Chikatilo himself was later ashamed of his actions. After the incident, he decided that he would only have sex with his future wife. Chikatilo was aiming to get married at 25 years old, but his chosen one refused him and told him that she would never get together with an impotent. What's even worse is that the girl also discussed Andrei's problems with her friends. Soon, Andrei was mocked by the whole town he lived in. All his future attempts to have sex with women ultimately failed. Andrei admitted to being an impotent and tried to end his life several times. Chikatilo married a woman named Feodosia Onecheva. Chikatilo and Feodosia lived peacefully, despite having problems in their sexual life. Despite his impotency, he soon became a father. Feodosia gave birth to a girl and a boy, 3 years apart. Relocation and a new job. In the 1970s, Chikatilo and his family moved to a town called Shakti. There, he became a teacher in a local school. Everything seemed all right. Moved to a new town, growing children, a loving wife. But the man's quirks were more and more apparent. Pretending to be a caring teacher, he sat next to girls, allegedly to explain complex material to them, and touched them in inappropriate places. He also often touched himself in front of a class. His pupils made fun of him and mocked the man, calling him a weirdo and a jerk-off. The end to his teaching career came when he touched one of his students. The boy screamed, and the whole class came to his assistance, jumping at Chikatilo and violently beating him. First blood. The year was 1978. On the 22nd of December, a 9-year-old schoolgirl, Yelena Zakotnova, was walking near her home in Shakti when she was approached by a joyful grown man. He looked a bit funny, being tall and wearing big glasses. The man introduced himself as Andrei and offered the girl to come to his house and try some imported bubblegum. The moment the victim stepped into the building, the man threw her on the bed and started ripping her clothes off. The girl screamed and tried to fight him, which provoked the man even more. Having experienced sexual pleasure, he stabbed Yelena in the stomach and then strangled her into unconsciousness before throwing her body into a local river. That was Chikatilo's first murder. The body in the river was found 2 days later. Investigators questioned a witness who saw the girl standing with an unknown man near a tram stop before heading into an alley. The killer was sketched, and Andrei was recognized by the director of the school Chikatilo worked in. Andrei's wife, during the investigation, left out some details about her husband's weird behavior. She didn't tell the investigators about Chikatilo suddenly running away from home, coming back, searching for something, and then running away again. Furthermore, Feodosia lied about Chikatilo staying home that day. The maniac now had an alibi. Desperate to solve such an outrageous case as fast as possible, the police decided to pin the murder on Alexander Kravchenko, who was previously convicted to 10 years in prison due to a similar crime. The investigation threatened Kravchenko and his family, after which he confessed to the murder he didn't commit and signed all the documents. In 1983, he was sentenced to death and executed on the 5th of July. Serial killings begin. Andrei Chikatilo laid low after his first murder. He thought that the next one will surely lead to him getting caught. But his male organ thought otherwise. He desperately needed to experience those feelings again. The next murder was only a matter of time. Several months later, the maniac murdered a 17-year-old college student. According to some sources, the girl was a part-time prostitute and voluntarily went with the stranger to the beach of Don River. Chikatilo tried to have sex with her, but once again failed and was mocked by the student. The laugh was the last one she ever had. Chikatilo bit both of the victim's nipples and stuffed her mouth with dirt, suffocating her. The nightmare continued in 1982. Chikatilo found his victims on rail stations, bus stops, in trains and buses. He looked for children traveling without their parents. He introduced himself to them, earned their trust, and, using various tricks, made them follow him. He offered his victims entertainment, treats, offered to show a shortcut, listen to some music, or watch a film. Every single month, the police found a body near Rostov-na-Donu. Occasionally, the investigators had to move out to the woods several times a month. Each of the victims' deaths was slow and painful. He abused them as much as he could. Chikatilo dismembered people and cut out their insides while they were still alive. Boys were found missing their genitals. Girls were found missing nipples and tongues. Their clothes were found all over the place. The bodies, featuring countless stab wounds and cut-out eyes, were a horrifying sight. The man cut out his victim's eyes because he thought that the eyes can disclose his identity to the investigators. Dealing with his victims, Chikatilo let his wicked sexual fantasies loose. Sometimes he pretended that a knife's blade was a dildo, performing characteristic movements with it. He was disgusted by the genitals of his victims because of his self-doubt. He was an ill impotent, pleasured exclusively by the sufferings of innocent children and women. Some parts of the bodies the man occasionally took with himself. His wife mentioned that the maniac always took a pot on his trips. The man admitted to eating his victims' genitals. He thought that doing it improves potency. Investigators following the case thought that the killer was a morgue worker who had a lot of experience dealing with bodies. The Fool's Case. In 1983, policemen had found more bodies scattered across the town. Several murder cases were combined into one. The search focused on finding a mentally ill person. Lawmen and investigators began questioning all local residents on the list in psych wards. In autumn of 1983, a mentally retarded suspect was arrested. During a questioning, the suspect admitted to stealing a car with another man and killings of several children. In press and among the community, the investigation was given an unofficial name: the Fool's Case. Several mentally retarded detainees admitted to murders, but always gave incomprehensible information and messed up all the details about the murders. None of them could state a place, time, or other details which were already known about the murders. In the meantime, while the Fool's Case went nowhere, Andrei Chikatilo continued the slaughter. In September of 1983, near the town of Novoshaktinsk, he murdered an unknown woman. In the next month, his victim was a 19-year-old girl. After 2 months, he killed his first male victim, a 14-year-old Sergei Markov. Only in 1985, when a new investigator was assigned to the case, the Fool's Case was closed, and the investigation proceeded with new force. First arrest. In 1984, Chikatilo savagely killed 15 victims, the most in 1 year. His overall murder count was 32 victims. During this year, Chikatilo was finally noticed by the police. A police officer thought that the behavior of an intelligent-looking man with a briefcase was weird. He thought that the man looked weirdly excited. A search of his briefcase revealed a rope, knife, Vaseline, and dirty sheets. Medicine, being not as advanced back then, did not reveal anything suspicious about the belongings, so the man was released. Andrei Chikatilo was, once again, free and could proceed with his brutality. He moved to another city, Novocherkassk, and managed to murder 21 people until he was arrested again. For 6 years, the man went unpunished. After another murder with the familiar touch of the serial killer, the police began developing an operation titled Forest Path. It took operatives several years to pick up Chikatilo's path. As of 1990, the victim count of Andrei Chikatilo went over 50 people. On the 6th of December, after murdering Svetlana Korostik and exiting a forest path near a railway station, Chikatilo was stopped by a policeman and had his documents checked. His outfit, which consisted of a suit with a tie, seemed suspicious to the lawman. But without a reason to detain him, the man was let go. Second arrest. After 7 days, the body of Svetlana Korostik was found in this area. The investigators checked the reports of all the officers operating in this area and came upon Chikatilo. They started following him. Chikatilo wasn't at all concerned that he might be suspected of anything. Killing for that long and not being punished led him to believe that he was untouchable. After some days since his last murder, while being followed, he acted weird, tried to earn random children's trust and initiate any sort of conversation, and hung around his regular killing spots. On the 20th of November 1990, Chikatilo took a day off work and went to a clinic with a broken finger. It was bit by one of his most recent victims, Viktor Tushenko. After that, he went back home, took a 3-liter bottle, allegedly for kvass, and went to the shop. On the way back, he tried to initiate conversation with some children playing in the backyard. During this interaction, the man was detained. That was the last day of the killer's freedom. A search of Chikatilo's flat revealed 23 knives, footwear which had a print that matched the one found on a crime scene, and a briefcase with a rope, knife, and Vaseline. The investigators figured that they might have detained a potential serial killer, but Chikatilo remained silent. The legal period of detention was coming to an end, and they had no undoubtable evidence. After failing to crack a serial killer, the investigators asked a famous psychiatrist, Bukhanovsky, for help. Bukhanovsky agreed to help the investigation and arrived at a meeting with the detainee. The psychiatrist shared these memories about the 24-hour conversation they had. "We were sitting in front of each other. Firstly, I told him that I am a doctor and my mission is to help him. I am not an investigator and I am not a judge, so I am not going to question the moral or legality of your doings. Maybe the things that happened to you is not your fault, but a tragedy. No one can understand it better than a doctor." I presented him some details from my personal investigation, the ones in which I described his childhood, his family, his parents. He read all of them and started crying. He often cried during our conversation, like a child. I let him speak out. He was struggling at first, but then he came together with senses and started explaining everything in details. The investigation focused on finding out the number of victims and if the murderer is mentally ill. The man actively cooperated with the investigation, showing all the places of the murders, even if they happened a lot of years ago. According to some sources, he thought that the more murders he reveals, the more likely is the chance that he will be pronounced mentally ill. To the 36 murders known to the investigators, almost 20 more were added after the testimony of Chikatilo. Some of them were disproven later, so the court was presented with 53 victims that were killed by the maniac. Trial and conviction. To find out if the killer was mentally ill, a forensic psychiatrist evaluation was performed. Criminal code specified that a person who was found out to be in a state of insanity while performing a socially dangerous act is not a subject to criminal liability. The evaluation declared that Chikatilo was perfectly sane while performing the murders and could be prosecuted. On the 14th of April 1992, Chikatilo was brought to trial in Rostov. The process was witnessed by relatives of his victims and citizens of Rostov-na-Donu. Journalists documented the trial, fragments of it were shown on TV. Chikatilo was put in a cage to protect him from getting attacked by the relatives of the victims. During the trial, Chikatilo's behavior was aggressive. He shouted irrelevant phrases, tried to interrupt the process. It is suspected that he did these things to get treated as mentally ill. On the 15th of October 1992, Chikatilo was sentenced to the harshest form of punishment. Taking into consideration the horrible misdeeds of which he is guilty, this court has no alternative but to impose the only sentence that he deserves. I therefore sentence him to death. It is worth noting that the sentence was read to him for a duration of 2 days. After the trial, the serial killer was taken to the death row cell of Novocherkassk. In the death row cell, Chikatilo took care of himself. He didn't smoke, regularly exercised, and ate healthy food. he lodged multiple appeals for clemency. In the last one, he noted his achievements and revealed his wishes. "I ask you to have mercy on me, to save my life. For 40 years I worked for the good of our country. 30 of those years were in the party, building communism. My life was full of hard work and hardships. I wished to live in a new, free Russia." Despite all the appeal letters and requests from the killer, on the 14th of February, he was taken to a soundproofed room. Chikatilo, to the very last moment, couldn't believe he was getting executed. He was asked to face the wall. Then the weapon was cocked, and he was executed with a single shot to the head. He was buried in a nameless grave on a special graveyard of Novocherkask's prison. That was the end of the life of a serial maniac, butcher, and torturer, Andrei Chikatilo. 30 years have passed since the moment of his death, yet Chikatilo's name periodically comes up in movies, in programs that discuss details of his biography and events that turned an innocent boy into a bloodthirsty monster. If this video was interesting to you, then please support us by subscribing to our channel, leaving a like and a comment on this video. That is the best motivation for us to make new, interesting videos.